Hey, what's up, everybody? Mick Gillespie in for Kyle Henderson. I'm with the recruiting guru himself, Mr. Andrew Bone. Welcome to the Bama Insider Recruiting Show. This is where Andrew Bone gives you the latest information on Alabama football recruiting. Drop your comments in the comment box for Bone. Remember, all super chats go to Mr. Andrew Bone. A super chat is like a tip. So just remember that. And first off, before we get going, Bone, condolences. I know it's been a tough week for you. You know, I was raised by my grandmother. She's the biggest influence in my life. So I know you had a tough week, man. And all of us, we love you, brother, and we know you had a tough week, man. Condolences.
Yeah, thank you, Mick. Yeah, my grandmother passed away last Thursday, 98 years old. She was a special woman. I mean, she had a great life, special life. She loved by many, and we'll never forget her. So really appreciate all the time that I had with her, and it was it was a tough situation for our whole family. When my wife and I were the last two to see her alive last Thursday, spent about 30 minutes with her, and then about 45 minutes later, we got a text that she had passed away, and so that's something that's going to be with us for the rest of our lives, and we were very thankful that we got a chance to see her one last time. So that was a tough weekend for us, tough weekend for our family. My father's mother, and he has three other brothers, and a lot of grandkids, some great grandkids, and big family. So it was a tough situation, but hey, you know what? She had a great life, and very happy to get a chance to spend a little bit of time with her. So I really appreciate the thoughts and prayers from everyone. I had a lot of different messages from Alabama fans on Twitter, on social media, on the Bama Insider Recruiting Board. It means the world to us. So really appreciate all the fans out there that were praying and thinking of us this past weekend.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. You realize you put things in perspective, like just we all love football and we love being a part of, all this stuff. But, there's other things too that are way more important, when you go through this. All right, Bone, look, let's get into the recruiting. Alabama lands Kool-Aid, and that turns out to be just a super recruit for the Crimson Tide. They get him on Sunday.
Yeah, huge commitment for Alabama, getting Kool-Aid. Of course, we just talked about my grandmother. Kool-Aid committed during my grandmother's funeral on Sunday. So, no surprise there that, I'm sure grandmother would have loved to seen Kool-Aid make that decision because she was an Alabama fan. But, Kool-Aid makes that commitment to Alabama. It was a huge pickup, not only because he's the number one player in the state of Alabama, but it's a huge position of need. Next year, potentially lose Patrick Surtain Jr. That's definitely a strong possibility. He's projected as a first-round draft pick. There's going to be some wide open competition for Alabama. They've got a great defensive back class so far. I mean, certainly extremely talented, but Ga'Quincy McKinstry, number 2 cornerback in the entire country, according to Rivals.com. And a guy that many felt like was going to Auburn. He even felt like he was going to Auburn. Probably, a month and a half ago, he talked about how he was, really leaning towards Auburn. But then over the last month, he just really, thought hard about it and, felt like Alabama was the best choice for him. Obviously the defensive back reputation, the development, Nick Saban, the proximity to home, the people that he knows down there, but also he grew up a big fan of Alabama. He didn't really let that out. A lot of people kept saying, Kool-Aid's a fan of, this school or that school. And I think a lot of people were making predictions. He never really said, I was a big Alabama fan growing up. He always just said, anytime we ever talked to him about anything, he always just said, I like both the in-state schools growing up. I like this school. I like that school. I was just a fan of the SEC. So he never really came out and said, I grew up a diehard Alabama fan. Well, he finally came out and said that after he committed to Alabama on Sunday. You got to give a lot of credit to Carl Scott, Alabama cornerbacks coach, who's also his lead recruiter throughout the entire process. I just, I kept thinking, even though, there was all these predictions coming in on Auburn, and he was even favoring Auburn at one point, and even I felt like he was going to Auburn, I just had it kind of in the back of my head, there's no way Carl Scott's going to let this guy get away. Carl Scott's one of the best recruiters in the country. He's got a really good defensive back class, but this is his prize recruiting in this class. This is an in-state kid, his territory. The number one player in the state of Alabama. Carl Scott probably would not have wanted to go to work the next day when Kool-Aid announced for another school. So I just never saw him. Never saw Carl Scott missing out on him, even if Kool-Aid would have committed to Auburn. I thought Carl Scott was going to fight for him all the way until the end, and didn't have to. Ended up getting his commitment on Sunday. So huge commitment there. A guy that can come in, can contribute right away. Like I said, this is a great defensive back class. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is one of Saban's best classes in terms of overall defensive backs. This is the 5th defensive back commitment. I think it's a very talented, very competitive class. I mean, you got a lot of just absolute dogs in this class who are going to be, have a lot of swagger, a lot of confidence, and that's what you need. I mean, this is the number one recruiting class in the country, and you're hitting needs on both sides of the football. I mean, we talked about going into this recruiting cycle. Alabama really needs some offensive linemen, wide receivers on defense. Load up at linebacker, defensive line, cornerback, and they've certainly done a great job right now so far. So there's still some key targets who are out there that they're heavily recruiting, heavily wanting to add to this class, and I think that they can continue to add some really elite talent over the course of the next few months.
Why did McKinstry announce on Sunday? What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, I think it was just time. He was ready to make that commitment. We had been talking about, Kool-Aid making a decision for months. And he'd been saying every single day, I'm going to commit on this day. I'm going to commit on that day. Or I could commit tomorrow. I could commit on signing day. Well, he finally decided, all right, I'm ready. I know where I want to go. And, obviously his entire family was behind him.
Well, no doubt about it. So what does that leave Alabama? And let me remind everyone, too, that this is the Bama Insider Recruiting Show. Andrew Bone's giving us the latest information and insight on recruiting. Alabama still with the number one class, according to Rivals. Where does this leave Alabama when it comes to spots available, and where do they go now that they've added another defensive back?
Yeah, I talked about this today on Bama Insider, just in terms of the overall numbers. I think the overall numbers, nobody really knows for sure how many spots are left, because you can play around with the numbers a little bit. You can kind of figure some things out. Alabama's always trying to nitpick and try to figure it all out towards the end. But everybody keeps saying, oh, there's only 2 spots left. There's only 3 spots left. I think there's kind of a range. I think, there's a range between 2 and 4 spots that remain. Alabama definitely will take 2. Will they take 3? I think so. Now, 4, that's going to be a little bit of a stretch, but there's still so many guys that are out there. They're heavily recruiting. If they can get some of those guys on board, it's going to be hard for them to turn down. You look on the offensive side of the ball, wide receiver. I mean, Brian Thomas still out there, still a key target for Alabama. They're still also recruiting Xavier Worthy, Michigan commitment. I don't know if he's going to flip, but I do think that Alabama has a chance, a real strong chance with Brian Thomas. Then the defensive side of the ball, you asked about, how many more defensive backs will Alabama take? Alabama has 5 defensive back commitments right now. Sage Ryan, that's somebody that Alabama fans need to pay pretty close attention to over the course of the next few days, because he's going to be announcing his decision on Halloween. So on Saturday, Sage Ryan, one of the top safeties in the country out of Louisiana, is announcing his decision. Now, for the last few months, it has seemed like a very close battle between Alabama and LSU. Now, he's got some family ties to LSU, lives in Louisiana, and definitely somebody that many LSU fans feel like is a lock to LSU. I just don't know if that's the case. I think Alabama has really done a great job behind the scenes working him, and would not be surprised if if he committed to Alabama on Saturday. I'm not predicting just yet. Give me a couple more days to make a firm, solid prediction, but I think that Alabama is very much in the race with Sage Ryan. despite all the connections with LSU, I think they've done a good job. And you never know. LSU just picked up an in-state safety commitment, this week. So that may be a sign right there that Sage Ryan may be heading to Alabama. But we'll wait and see. Let's not count those chickens just yet. So let's see what happens. But I'll be making a firm prediction here in the next couple of days on BamaInsider.com. But I think Alabama's very much in the race with Sage Ryan heading into that decision this weekend.
Talking recruiting with Andrew Bone. Don't forget, all super chats go to Mr. Bone himself as we talk about Kool-Aid committing to Alabama. The number one class just keeps on getting better. Let's stick with Sage Ryan for a second, because there's a lot of smoke that Alabama could possibly get him, which would make this young secondary coming in even better. What are with all these guys that they have coming in the secondary, would that deter someone from him, like him, from coming, or are there enough spots available to have him and Kool-Aid and the rest of the guys that they would have coming in for that secondary spot?
Yeah, sometimes you just don't know. Alabama's always kind of felt like 5-6 defensive backs in this class was kind of a must. Will it potentially spurn someone from this class to go somewhere else? We don't know. We don't know if that's going to affect somebody a lot. But Alabama has a great defensive back class right now. Most of the guys are corners. I mean, you have Kyrie Jackson, one of the top junior college cornerbacks in the country, recruited pretty much as a corner. Ga'Quincy McKinstry, recruited as a corner. Devontae Smith, Smitty 2.0 is what I like to call him. He's he's definitely a guy who can play just about any position in the defensive backfield, but recruited mostly as a corner. Kadarius Callaway, 6 foot, about 210 pounds. Now, 210 pounds. A lot of people want to think safety automatically, but this is a 4.50, 40 type guy. I mean, he's a tremendous athlete, can play just about any defensive back position. Kane Williams, another very talented defensive back out of the state of Louisiana. Alabama already has one, really good defensive back from Louisiana. Can they potentially get two? So we'll see. But Alabama, if Sage Ryan wants to commit to Alabama, Alabama's not going to say no. But we'll see if that may affect somebody else's decision a little bit down the road. But for the most part, these guys are pretty solid commitments. But let's just say if they do get 6 commitments, if they do get Sage Ryan, I think that does really affect what potentially may happen with Terrion Arnold. Terrion Arnold has been one of Alabama's top targets for a very long time out of Tallahassee. Alabama gets 6 defensive back commitments. I just don't know if Terrion Arnold's going to end up at Alabama. I think he'll probably end up going somewhere else.
So what has Carl Scott done to have a recruiting class like this? Obviously, Alabama's corner coach.
Well, I think he's one of the best recruiters in the country. I think, the relationships that he builds with recruits, this is a tough year on the recruiting, on the recruiting front, because, you don't get a chance to really spend time with recruits in person. You don't get a chance to, work with them at camp. You don't get a chance to go see them on Friday nights or during the spring, or spend time with them at camp. You just don't get a chance to do that. Or on Saturdays when they're coming in to visit, you're not visiting with them before the game. But I think with Carl Scott and the rest of the coaching staff, I think just the relationships that they've built via phone calls, via text messages, via social media, throughout the entire year, all the FaceTime calls. I think that's really been a big plus for Alabama in this recruiting cycle.
How many spots are there? I mean, like, you hear 22, and then, Rivals has 22. You say there's 23. I mean, kind of explain that situation to us.
Yeah, it's funny. A few weeks ago we said something about, Caden Clark. Caden Clark was a gray shirt. It's going to be – and somebody tried to argue with me the other day about how Caden Clark's only counted against the 85 number. He's not counted against this year's recruiting class. Whoever's saying that is not – is not accurate. He is counted as a part of this recruiting class, and that's been 100% confirmed by those that make those decisions and know a little bit more than I do. But, yeah, he's definitely part of this class. So you really have 23 commitments in this class if you want to include Caden Clark in it, which Alabama has to include Caden Clark in it. So there's only about, I would say, 3, maybe 4 more spots remaining. So things are getting, pretty tricky. Now, as I said earlier, Alabama can potentially, work some numbers out. You may have a gray shirt. You may have a blue shirt. You can count. You make with a blue shirt, you can bring a guy in, but he's not counted until next year's class. Gray shirt, he doesn't come in until the next, till the following recruiting class. So, those are some things that Alabama, always has on the table. Every school has it. It's not just that thing that Alabama uses. Every school can use that. So, it's something that I think Alabama always likes to wait until the end. Along with other schools, it's not just, like I said, it's not just an Alabama thing. Everybody thinks it's just an Alabama thing. It's not just an Alabama thing. You got to wait to see who's still out there, who wants to commit to your program. And then if some of those top guys want to commit to your program, then you start trying to figure out, all right, who will potentially be a gray shirt, who will potentially be a blue shirt, what can we do to make this work, and who will agree to it, who wants to potentially delay their enrollment. And there's been plenty of kids who have said, hey, that's probably the best thing for me. And there's been some kids who've said absolutely not and ended up going somewhere else. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But I still think Alabama's heavily recruiting. Obviously, they're heavily recruiting about 10 to 12 players, but there's really probably, in my opinion, at least 3 to 4 more names that we're going to see join this recruiting class.
He's Andrew Bone. He's our recruiting guru. I'm Mick Gillespie in for Kyle Henderson. Kyle's on assignment. He'll be back next week for the recruiting show. So he actually filled for me yesterday on Monday Night Quarterback. And that's where we break down everything that happened on Saturday in the SEC. We're talking recruiting right now, though, and we are taking your questions. So you guys that are out there watching, you got questions. Now's the time to ask Andrew Bone. And here's the first one right here. It's from Metcraft. He says, what is it, 85 total scholarships you have? Some guys will probably transfer. And that's a good question. If they transfer, how does that work as far as recruiting goes? Because they've had some guys that go in the transfer portal. We saw a couple guys transfer to Mississippi State. How does that work as far as scholarships go?
Yeah, with everybody, in this – this weird year in 2020, I think that the NCAA has pretty much told everyone that they're going to have another year. If this year doesn't count, if they don't want it to count, it doesn't count. So they've got a free year if they want to come back. We're going to see 115 players on scholarship. I mean, there's just no way of getting around it. I think that's what you're going to have to do. It's not going to be you're not going to see 85 players on scholarship at schools next year. So, that number is going to be expanded next year. Now, they may have to, obviously, either trim that down at some point or, continue to keep it that way. But, there's just no getting around it. And especially if, there's just so many things I think the NCAA and these colleges are going to have to figure out because, especially with giving these athletes, these student athletes, another year of eligibility. It's not like they're going to say, okay, well, you can't sign, this many players. You're still, these players or these programs are still going to go out there and sign, 20 to 25 players in every single recruiting class, regardless of the situation. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion moving forward, but, nobody expected, COVID-19 to hit the country, hit the world. And, this is something that everybody's having to deal with. And it's something that, is causing a lot of problems, but at least the NCAA is giving a lot of they're at least giving an opportunity for these kids to have another year. But I don't think we're going to see definitely a lot more than 85 scholarship players on a team next year.
He's Andrew Bone. I'm Mick Gillespie. Remember, folks, hit that like button, hit the thumbs up, say thanks. You love listening to Andrew Bone give you those recruiting tips, and don't forget all the super chats go to Andrew Bone. So make sure you send those his way as well as we talk about Alabama recruiting. The big news, obviously, Sunday, they get Kool-Aid, they get McKinstry. That was a guy that they were kind of gearing up to get. So now it's kind of looking at this class, and I thought this was a really good question because, Matthew, I was going to ask something similar, but he says could be the best 2 classes in a row that we've ever had. It talks about maybe there weren't any pass rushers. I want you, Bone, take this question from Matthew and kind of build on it. Where do you compare this to since you've been covering Alabama as far as talent on a recruiting class?
That's that's tough because you look back at some of these great classes that Alabama's had throughout the last 12, 13 years, and there's been some special classes. I mean, I always go back to that 2008 recruiting class, which really kind of set the tone for what Alabama has built. With guys like Mark Ingram and Dante Hightower and Julio Jones. That crew. I mean, it was such a special class. And then, the next year, 2009, was another just unbelievable recruiting class with Trent and Eddie and, just so many talented players in that class. DJ Fluker, AJ McCarron, the list kind of goes on and on. But, I think that, Alabama certainly, in this year's class, I mean, it's certainly special. I mean, I think, offensive line-wise, Alabama has 4 very, very talented offensive linemen, which could potentially be, their best offensive line class that they've put together in the Saban era. I mean, I certainly feel that way, especially with J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockermeyer. These are 2 guys that are potentially, top 10 players. Tommy Brockermeyer currently as a number 10 overall player. I know Latham's listed as, top 5, at some other recruiting sites, but he's not on Rivals yet. But there's a lot of discussion that he might be the best offensive lineman in the country. So I certainly think that this is a special offensive line class. The wide receiver class, extremely talented as well. I mean, you always compare different position groups, and the position group in 2017, with Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and Smitty. I mean, is this class better than that class? I wouldn't say that just yet. That's a pretty spectacular wide receiver class back in 2017, but this class is really good. I mean, Ja'Cory Brooks, Christian Leary, Ajay Hall. I mean, this is a very talented recruiting class. And then obviously on the defensive side of the ball, really like the DB class, the linebacker class, extremely talented as well. So it's certainly a class that Alabama fans can get very excited about. We were talking about this recruiting class 6 months ago about how, they were ranked number 62 in the country. They couldn't get anybody to commit. There was all these other programs that were just lapping Alabama on the recruiting front. And we just kept saying, just slow down. Everything's going to work out the way it is. Just be patient. And obviously, when Alabama's key targets started making decisions, they started reeling guys in, and they haven't slowed down. They got Kool-Aid last weekend. Are they potentially going to get another big commitment this weekend in Sage Ryan? It's very possible.
He's Andrew Bone. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you like the show. He's on every Tuesday night talking recruiting, so make sure that you come by, hang out, and join us. K-Bar wants to know, has Corey Foreman crossed us off his list? Defensive tackle from Mason, Louisiana.
No, I'll give you a pass there. They're asking about 2 separate guys, Corey Foreman and Mason Smith from Louisiana. So let me start.
I'm the fill-in, okay?
Okay.
Forgive me, though. Forgive me.
So Corey Foreman, number 1 player in the country out of California. He hasn't necessarily come out and said Alabama's off my list, but he's not going to Alabama. He visited Alabama one time. He's visited LSU, Georgia, and, all these other places. He's not going to Alabama. And I don't even think Alabama's really in his top 5. He may say Alabama's in his top 5, but I think they're just, kind of hanging in there. But I don't even think he's really talking to Alabama. Another guy that, was mentioned is Mason Smith, 5-star defensive tackle out of Louisiana. Mason Smith, was a big Alabama fan growing up, but over the course of the last, couple of years, more so LSU, visited LSU a bunch of times. Everybody down in Louisiana thinks he's going to LSU. That may be the case, but I think he's, very much in play for Alabama. Continues to talk to Alabama very regularly, put out a top 5. I think it was, about a week and a half ago. Alabama's still very much in it. So we'll see what happens. But, if I were to pick, where he's going to go to college, I'd probably lean more LSU, maybe Georgia. Georgia's certainly a school that's very high on his list as well, but Alabama's certainly in it. If they can get him back on campus, he's going to be making a decision on December the 18th. So There's no official visits, nothing that are gonna happen, but he may end up coming back up to Tuscaloosa at least one weekend, just seeing everything. But he continues to talk with the coaching staff, has a good relationship with Pete Golding, Freddie Roach, the defensive line coach. So we'll see what happens. But as of right now, I wouldn't expect either one of those guys in Alabama's recruiting class.
If you like the show, make sure you tell Andrew Bone with a super chat that you appreciate it. Ask a question in there as well. Also, hit the thumbs up as you watch. This is the Bama Insider Recruiting Show. I'm Mick Gillespie in for Kyle Henderson. He'll be back next Tuesday. Andrew Bone, obviously the best in the business. Great to see you back, Andrew. All right, here's an awesome question. I really like this one a lot. And it was, well, that's not the one I was looking at, but here's a different one. I'm going to ask you the one I was thinking, and then we'll get into this as well. Someone wanted to know how tough it is when you know that something's going on in recruiting not to announce it, to kind of keep it quiet.
It's not that tough. I mean, been in this business a long time, 18 years. You don't want to ruin a kid's moment. Now, has that happened before? Yeah, and it sucks. I mean, kids want to, have their moment, whether they want to announce it on Twitter, whether they want to announce it, via, whatever, press conference, and sometimes it gets let out of the bag a little bit too soon. And, sometimes, maybe it comes from from a different school, a school saying, oh, this kid's, flipping from us, or he's not going here, he's going there. So, sometimes that sucks because that stuff does get out there. But as far as, we are concerned at BamaInsider.com, we've been told many, many times, well beforehand, where a kid's going to go to college, or where he's at least going to commit to. Sometimes he doesn't go to that college. Sometimes he flips. But we've been told many, many times, we knew Kool-Aid was coming to Alabama. We knew he was going to announce, knew that, for about, I think about a week or so, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 2 weeks. But just can't say where a kid's going to go. It's their moment. It's not our moment. It's their moment. I'm not trying to break a story on over a kid announcing his decision. Our goal is to put the information out there and put it out there the way that people want to read it. We talked to Kool-Aid about his commitment. We put that out there. He explained why he committed to Alabama. We talked to his coach, Sam Shade, former Alabama star on the 92 national championship team. Talked to him about, what he saw in Kool-Aid and what makes him such a special player. So that's what we want you to read. We don't care about, ruining a kid's moment. And most people in this industry don't. They want to, they do it the right way. We have a lot of competition in this market, but most people, they completely understand the situation. I think the only people that really kind of come in and try to ruin a kid's moment are the guys that maybe they don't work for a big network. They're trying to make a name out for themselves. But for the most part, there's a lot of respect for these kids and their decisions, and that's what it's all about, because it's not your moment, it's their moment.
He's Andrew Bone. Make sure you hit the thumbs up. Hit the like button. Appreciate Andrew Bone. Make sure you hit him with a super chat as we talk Alabama recruiting like we do right here on BamaInsider.com every Tuesday night with Bone. Bone, here's a good question from Daniel. I like this one a lot too. How different would team recruiting be if there wasn't COVID?
Oh, my gosh, yeah. I mean, I certainly think it'd be different now. For Alabama, it's worked out pretty well. I mean, but I do think there's probably some guys that they could have had on their recruiting board now that are simply not there. I think with Xavier Worthy, I think that's a big guy right there that Alabama heavily recruited. The Rivals 100 wide receiver out of California, is committed to Michigan. Never had a chance to visit Alabama. I think he was hoping to get to Tuscaloosa during the summer. I think he would have been won over by Alabama coaching staff. Tamise Adelier, that's another guy that Alabama was very much involved with, and still very much involved with. Still could end up going to Alabama, but he was supposed to visit Alabama back in the spring. COVID hits. He ends up committing to Ohio State. Now, the good thing for Alabama is he decided to decommit from Ohio State. Alabama's considered one of his top 3 schools, so we'll kind of see what happens. Amarius Mims, 5-star offensive tackle from Georgia, never had an opportunity to visit Tuscaloosa again. And I know a lot of a lot of different programs. We've seen, different recruits go to these schools, but they really haven't had an opportunity to, spend a lot of time with these college coaches, with the strength and conditioning staff, with the academic support staff, with everybody that you typically get a chance to spend time with during a recruiting visit. A lot of that, it just hasn't happened. Hasn't happened since junior days, back in February and January. So I do think that this class, would be a little bit different. You never know if, maybe there's a guy in Alabama's class right now who may be going somewhere else because, they had an opportunity to visit another school and may have fallen in love. So, but, for the most part, I think things are pretty good for Alabama right now, sitting with that top recruiting class in the country. But I do feel like they have probably missed out on a few guys that they would have landed if COVID didn't happen.
We're talking to Andrew Bone. Make sure you hit the like button, hit the thumbs up. Also, super chats are definitely welcome as Bone talks recruiting like he does right here on our YouTube channel every Tuesday night. Okay, Bama's got the number one recruiting class. We've talked about Kool-Aid committing on Sunday, some of the other guys, and we'll kind of recap that here before we go off the air. But Jackie has a question, and it kind of is a follow-up to, like keeping information to yourself. And I'll throw this out there. I was at the football game on Saturday, and I met Clay Travis. He's a Tennessee grad. He's like a national radio guy, and they bring me to meet him, and I walk up, and he kind of blows me off. I'm like, this guy, I can't believe this. And then I walk away and I come back. They had a 5-star recruit in town, quarterback recruit, and he was talking to that guy, and so he was preoccupied. It is to get these guys to commit to your school, is such a big deal, and I understand that. I mean, look, that's what we do right on here. If information, say he would told Clay, for example, who I think does a really good job on the air. If he said, "Hey, I'm coming to Tennessee," and Clay leaked it out, could that possibly change the guy's commitment? And Jackie wants to know, has that ever cost anyone a commit where maybe it was leaked out that someone was going to come somewhere and then one of you guys found out about it and released it and they don't go?
Yeah, I won't name any players, but I will say that, in my 18 years of covering recruiting, it has happened before. And I've seen it. Alabama's lost a recruit before because of it. Other programs have lost recruits, before because of it. Now, there's been some times where they've been able to reel those guys back in, but it does happen. You wouldn't think it would happen just because, who cares? But recruits care. Sometimes a recruit may say, tell a college coach, hey, do not let anything out about my commitment. I'm going to commit to you. Don't let a single thing, word out, because it does. I mean, recruits get it. They know that, that stuff leaks from time to time, and it happens. It happens a lot. It happens a lot more than people will ever imagine. But people got to keep it quiet. If a reporter is told, hey, this kid's committing, you got to keep it quiet. That's just kind of the bottom line. But it has happened before, and I won't name any names, but it has happened. In the last 10 or 12 years, it's happened for sure, and it's happened. I wouldn't say it's happened a ton at Alabama. I really can't remember, really one particular instance. I know it has, but it has happened more so, elsewhere, from my recollection.
Here's another good question here, and I'm going to do my best to get this pronunciation right. The Nylon Morset, assuming we land him, do we actually have a chance for Caleb Burton, or do we focus on C.J. Williams? What do you think, Bone?
Yeah, every week on our show, we always talk about 2020 recruits, and it's kind of difficult. It's very difficult because a lot of these guys still have not properly been evaluated, because they missed the entire spring evaluation period. There were no kids at summer camp this year, so you didn't. Alabama and a lot of these other top programs, they want to see these guys in person at some point. They're hoping to get kids on campus for junior day. That obviously they're evaluating film, but guess what? It's so much more than just evaluating high school film. You got to see these kids in person. You got to size them up. You got to talk to them and make sure they have the right pedigree to play at the University of Alabama. So you want to make sure that they've got everything that you're absolutely looking for in a prospect before you say, all right, oh, he's got all the skills, but what else does he have? How smart is he? How quickly does he understand defenses and coverages? So yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot going on. Still that Alabama's going to have to figure out in terms of wide receiver prospects, but another big prospect, another big part of it, is how is this recruiting class going to finish? Will Alabama get another wide receiver? So that's going to really be a big part of it. If they end up signing 4 wide receivers in this class, maybe they only sign 2 in next year's recruiting class. So we'll see kind of what happens. But those are some of the top guys that are on Alabama's top of their recruiting board early on. But at the same time, I think that we're going to see probably a really small number of wide receivers, but still a lot of evaluation going on. Guess what? This time last year, we weren't talking about Ja'Cory Brooks. We weren't talking about A.J. Hall. We weren't talking about Christian Leary. We weren't talking about any of those guys as being on Alabama's recruiting board, or even especially on their commitment list. And then now they have 3 of the best wide receivers in the country. So we'll see how next year's class goes. But I think we'll probably still, and we're probably still several months away before we see some big commitments at the wide receiver position in 2022.
He's Andrew Bone. Hit the like button, hit the thumbs up if you like the show. We appreciate you doing that. Also, super chats are certainly welcome for Andrew Bone. Hey, don't forget, Friday night we'll have Bone on the Bama Insider Tailgate Show. We will be on the air 6 to 8 live from Innisfree, previewing Alabama against Mississippi State as the Crimson Tide try to keep their perfect streak alive after a win over Tennessee. 14 straight over Tennessee, which is a new school record. Every time they beat those guys, it's a new school record. And Bone, you know what? Not this Friday, but you're going to be back again signing your book, man. I got to ask you, all the great stories in your book, you go back through and you look at the recruiting of different great Alabama players. I read the chapter on Tua, and I'm thinking Tua just would not look right to me in a USC uniform or at Oregon, or somewhere else. He's Alabama through and through, right? But it didn't always look like maybe he was going to end up there. We were lucky we got him. Before we really get into the book and where we can meet you and get a copy, tell me an interesting story about someone like Kool-Aid or in this class that if you were writing a second book, you would think it was interesting enough to do a chapter on. Whether they're going to be a great player or not, we don't know, but you follow this recruiting, and there's got to be some crazy stories in there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there certainly is. I mean, you look at a lot of these recruits that are in this recruiting class. And you got 3 guys in this class that were once committed elsewhere. I think, Jalen Milroe would be a fun story to write just because, top quarterback from the state of Texas, flipped from Texas to Alabama. He was a strong Alabama lean early on in his recruitment. And then Alabama ends up getting a commitment from Drake May. Well, ends up, Alabama had yet to pick up a commitment from Bryce Young. So Alabama wasn't going to take 2 quarterbacks in the 2021 recruiting class before Bryce Young committed. So Jalen Milroe ends up committing to Texas, and then obviously Drake May decommits, flips to North Carolina, and Alabama continues to push hard for Jalen Milroe. So I think that would be a fun story to write. Just kind of dynamics of that whole situation. Obviously Kool-Aid, being the top player in the state of Alabama. His back and forth. But, he did grow up an Alabama fan. So a lot of people would say, well, he was always going to Alabama the whole time. I think it'd be a little bit more fun to write about Ian Jackson, the Prattville linebacker, who grew up a big-time Auburn fan. Pretty much his whole family, hardcore Auburn people. His mom went to school there. His sister goes to school there. So they're all Auburn people. Okay, it would be almost kind of like writing a story on Rashaan Evans, the Rashaan Evans story that was in the Road to Bama. So I think Ian Jackson's story would be pretty fun to write about how he ended up, kind of spurning the family and going to the University of Alabama. But the Road to Bama was such a fun book to write for me because I've covered recruiting for 18 years. It was such a we That was 2 weeks ago, so we won't be having that book signed.
Well, it's just like the picture of it, though. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, so
Are you going back to Rounders again? Are we going to see you at Innisfree?
right? Oh yeah, absolutely. So absolutely. And I'll be at if anybody's in the Birmingham area, I'll be at Slice Pizza in Vestavia next Thursday. So Slice Pizza in Vestavia Hills next Thursday for anybody that wants to come by, eat some pizza from 5 to 7 p.m. and hang out with me. We'll probably have a beer or two up there as well. But yeah, I mean, like I said, the book was such a fun thing to write. I mean, covered all these different recruits from the Saban era, the Shula era, but really going back to the Bear Bryant era and talking to all those great former Alabama players like Johnny Musso and John Hanna and Dwight Stevenson and Leroy Jordan, Marty Lyons. I mean, what an honor it was to speak to all of those guys and have them as a part of the book. And then talking to guys like Cornelius Bennett and Bobby Humphrey and David Palmer and Langham and Jay Barker and just so on and so on. I mean, it was such a fun book to write and talk to all of those guys about their recruiting journey, talk to their family members, talk to coaches who recruited them. But I'll tell you what was cool was talking to Gene Stallings. I never had an opportunity to talk to Gene Stallings before, and he couldn't have been nicer. I mean, what an unbelievable guy he is. And when I first called him, he said, I asked him how he was doing, and he was like, I had a heart attack and a couple strokes this year, but other than that, I'm doing pretty good. Man, I don't know if I'd be talking to anybody, but that was really cool to speak to him and hear his memories of these former players that he coached, and his favorite player, the best player, or I don't know if it was a favorite, but he said the absolute best player he ever coached was David Palmer, and that was
Deuce.
Yeah, that was an honor for me to write about David and talk to him, and because I'm still kind of young. I mean, I'm 35 years old, but some of my first memories as an Alabama football fan, it was of David Palmer. I mean, I loved David Palmer growing up, and Antonio Langham. I remember being at the SEC championship game, at Legion Field when he had that pick six. Against Florida. So, I'll always remember that. So that was, and I've Antonio and I have grown to be friends over the course of the last few years. So, getting to know him and having him as a part of the book was certainly an honor for me.
Well, I'll tell you what, just having, you gave me one, and just having read through it, it's hard to put it down. I mean, you get kind of one story in, and then you're like, hey, wait a second, I want to hear about how Jay Barker got here. I want to know about Deuce. I remember Deuce. Tennessee fans hate Deuce. You know that, right? They hate Deuce because he beat one of the best teams they ever had. It really just tied them, but back when there were ties, they don't even do that anymore. Scoring a late touchdown. So, awesome job with the book, and I think all of us that are watching appreciate how much time and effort it takes to put all those stories down and actually get them on paper. So, any final thoughts, Bone, before we kind of bid everybody farewell? I mean, the great news is that Alabama got Kool-Aid. You were pretty confident that was going to happen, and he made his announcement. We've kind of dwindled down to a small group of players that are still spots really that are still available for players. And I guess from here on out, it's trying to figure out, what spots match what players are still available. But Alabama have a chance to finish with the number one recruiting class.
Yeah, I do think they've got a great chance to finish one or two. I mean, Ohio State, certainly, has a chance still to finish potentially as the number one class. They have some key 5-star recruits who are still out there who are leaning to them right now. But we're still 2 months away from a lot of players making their decisions. So I think we're going to see some probably some pretty big surprises. I mean, there's so many guys in this recruiting class, and I said this on the Bama Insider recruiting board earlier today. I said, 2 months prior to these guys announcing, we weren't talking about J.C. Latham being in Alabama's class. We weren't talking about T.J. Ferguson being in Alabama's class, or Ajay Hall, or Christian Leary, or or Kool-Aid. We all thought, everyone thought Kool-Aid was going to Auburn. Even Kool-Aid thought he was going to Auburn. So even though it may look like somebody's leaning towards one school today, that may not be the case, come mid-December or come January or come February. You just have to continue to recruit these guys all the way until the end, because you never know how it's going to unfold. But there's still some key spots that, key targets who are out there. Only a few spots left, but I still think Alabama's got a really good chance to finish extremely strong. And like I said, we'll see what happens with Sage Ryan come Saturday, because I do think that Alabama is very strongly in the mix for him. And it's coming down to the wire between Alabama and LSU. And, we've talked about for months how LSU seems like the heavy favorite for him because of the family connections, and the proximity to home. But Alabama has really kind of sold him on being that next Xavier McKinney at the University of Alabama. And I think he's been listening for a while. And I would not be surprised if he ended up committing to Alabama on Saturday.
If he commits, how much better does Alabama's recruiting class get?
Well, he's the number 32 player overall in the Rivals 100, right on the cusp of a 5-star. So it gets really good, and it certainly sends some shockwaves throughout the recruiting landscape, especially with a guy from Louisiana who's been considered an LSU lean throughout the entire process. LSU family, definitely that would definitely be a big win for Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide if they're able to get Sage Ryan on Saturday.
Well, I guess that just about does it for us, Bone. Let me remind everyone to hit the thumbs up, send a super chat. Bone gets that as we kind of wrap things up here. I'll be back on Friday with Bone. He'll join us this Friday for the Bama Insider Tailgate Show. We'll be at Innisfree from 6 to 8 to do the live show right here on YouTube TV. And if you miss it, you can also listen to the show from 9 to 11 on Jocks 2, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa. Bone, if you're driving around, freak out your friends and turn the radio on, and there you'll be. Like, you'll be talking, but you'll be driving at the same time, right? That's 100.5. Kyle has a bunch of stuff planned. He'll be on the show Friday night. He'll pop back in on Saturday before the game and then after the game as well. And so you just got so many different things that you can click on and watch here on the Bama Insider YouTube channel. So, man, I appreciate all the insight. I'm getting pretty excited, man. Alabama just the problem is they need some more spots just so they can keep on stockpiling all this talent, Bone.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, they've got a lot of guys that are out there that they still want. Not a lot of spots left, so they'll make it work. I've told everybody for years and years and years, the numbers are going to work. It always works out. Don't worry about the numbers. Everybody keeps saying, "Oh, well, there's 2 spots, there's 3 spots, there's 4 spots." Don't worry about it. Just let it play out. It will all work out the way you usually want it to. So just be patient and let things unfold. And I think Alabama fans will be happy with the end result.
Hey, Bone, thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.
All right, for Andrew Bone, I'm Mick Gillespie. Kyle Henderson will be back next Tuesday with the Bama Insider Recruiting Show. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. And we really appreciate you guys hanging with us tonight. Roll Tide.